Georgiana swallowed hard. Her voice shook as she forced the words out, each one landing like a strike to the heart of the celebration. "I'm pregnant." A hush swept over the room. She blinked, tears gathering, and it might be Richie's child. Gasps rippled from table to table. One woman covered her mouth. A man whispered, "No, not today." Richie's entire body stiffened. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Shock seemed to pin him to the spot. Natalie's face drained of color as she stared at her best friend, her maid of honor, trying to understand what she had just heard. For a moment, no one moved. The world felt suspended, as though even time refused to touch what had just been spoken. And at the center of it all stood Georgiana, shaking, unable to take her words back. As the shock settled over the room, a single truth hung in the air. Every person watching could feel the sting of betrayal, even if they didn't know how deep it ran. Moments like this force people to confront their own memories, their own wounds, their own broken trusts, because anyone who has lived long enough knows there comes a day when someone you love turns into someone you no longer recognize. So the narrator turns to the viewer, speaking to the part of them that remembers being hurt. Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only for them to shatter that trust in front of everyone? Have you ever looked at a person you believed would protect you and realized they were the very one tearing you apart? What would you do if the friend you grew up with, the one you shared secrets and milestones with, suddenly stole the spotlight at your wedding just to deliver a blow you never saw coming? These aren't questions asked lightly. They're asked because moments like this demand honesty from everyone watching, because betrayal doesn't just break hearts. It forces people to confront truths they never wanted to face. And for Natalie, this was the moment her entire world stopped making sense. The room remained frozen, suspended between disbelief and rising chaos. But beneath the whispers and the stunned silence, one truth pressed itself forward, a truth that no one in that room could ignore. This wasn't just an interruption. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't nerves. This was a direct strike at the heart of trust itself, because what Georgiana had done wasn't only shocking. It was public. It was brutal. It was the kind of blow meant to cut where it hurts most. Every guest could feel the weight of it, the betrayal, the confusion, the humiliation that had just been placed on Natalie's shoulders in front of everyone she loved. Richie stood frozen between guilt and dread, searching for words he didn't have. Natalie stared at Georgiana, unable to blink, unable to breathe, unable to understand why her closest friend would choose this moment, her moment, to deliver something so devastating. These were the kinds of wounds that didn't heal quickly, the kind that left a mark on every person involved. A mistake had been made long before this day. But now, its consequences were unfolding in the harshest way possible, and everyone watching could sense it. This was only the beginning of a much deeper story. Guests exchanged stunned looks, each one silently asking the same questions. Why now? Why like this? How could something so destructive erupt on a day meant for love? But what none of them realized, not the shocked families, not the confused guests, not even Natalie or Richie, was that this moment wasn't born from a single mistake. It had a history, a chain of choices and emotions that stretched far beyond what anyone could see, because the truth behind Georgiana's outburst wasn't simple. It wasn't random. It wasn't something that appeared out of thin air. There were secrets she had been carrying alone, loneliness she never knew how to admit, a decision made on a night when she felt like her life was slipping through her fingers, and now all of it was crashing into this one brutal moment. If only the people in that room knew. This wasn't just a confession. It was the result of quiet fears, hidden guilt, and a choice she regretted the second it happened. A storm had been building long before this wedding day, and this was merely the breaking point. The question wasn't whether the truth would come out. The real question was, would anyone survive what came after? As the tension held the room hostage, the narrator steps in, not to ease the moment, but to guide every viewer deeper into the heart of the story about to unfold. Because what happened at that wedding was only the opening scene of something far more complex and emotionally charged. So before diving into the full journey of trust, heartbreak, hidden choices, and the path toward healing, the narrator turns directly to the audience with a warm but steady tone. Welcome to the channel, whether you're here for the first time or you've been part of this storytelling family for a while. Today's story takes us into a moment where a celebration of love came to a sudden halt, leaving everyone in shock. A brief pause follows, enough for viewers to process the weight of what they've just heard. If you're someone who enjoys stories filled with emotional depth, real-life lessons, and moments that stay with you long after the video ends, then make sure you hit that like button. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. The narrator's voice settles into a steady rhythm again, drawing the audience closer, because the truth behind this wedding disaster isn't revealed all at once. It unfolds step by step, and the final piece won't make sense until the very end. Then the narrator returns to the scene, where the room is still frozen, stunned by Georgiana's confession, and the story is ready to finally begin. Billionaire always looked calm from the outside. Quiet streets, soft sunlight, the kind of place where people waved to neighbors without thinking. But for Natalie Will, it was never. The town that shaped her. It was the life she lived inside a small blue house with peeling paint and sunflowers that leaned toward the walkway like warm, loyal guardians. From childhood, Natalie learned how to appreciate little things, the steady hum of cicadas in the summer, her mother's gentle reminders to take life one step at a time, her father's laughter echoing through the kitchen on Friday evenings. Her world wasn't large, but it was steady, safe, predictable in a comforting way. She grew up understanding responsibility early, helping with chores, balancing school with part-time shifts at the local bakery, and caring deeply for anyone fortunate enough to earn a space in her quiet heart. Her dreams didn't involve fame or prestige. She simply wanted a life filled with honesty, warmth, and someone who would look at her the way her father looked at her mother. Natalie wasn't a woman who expected a fairy tale. She didn't see herself as the kind of person sweeping into a grand romance. She always believed that love, if it came, would arrive gently, without fireworks or extravagance. Still, she held on to small dreams, dreams she rarely voiced, dreams she stored close like delicate keepsakes. But for all her grounded nature, Natalie carried insecurities too. She sometimes wondered if she was too ordinary, too quiet, too easy to overlook in a world that celebrated louder voices. She often stood in her own shadow, believing she had to prove she was enough, not to others but to herself. And in those moments of doubt, she leaned on her closest friend, Georgiana Cruikshank. Georgiana was the opposite of quiet. If Natalie was a soft breeze, Georgiana was a gust of wind that swept into every room with confidence that demanded attention. She carried a charm that made people want to be near her, paired with an unpredictability that made them wonder what she would do next. They had grown up together, sharing everything from childhood secrets whispered in treehouses to teenage heartbreaks over boys who didn't know what to do with feelings. They survived each other's worst days and celebrated the best ones as if they were their own victories. It was Georgiana who pushed Natalie to try new things, to take risks, to dream a little bigger. And it was Natalie who grounded Georgiana, offering calm when she burned too brightly and stumbled. Their friendship was a balancing act, a mix of wild energy and quiet stability. They needed each other in different ways, and for years it worked. They were inseparable, two halves of a story that everyone in Billionaire already knew by heart. Yet even in their closeness, everyone noticed the contrast between them. Natalie's life was calm, steady, predictable. Georgiana's was a roller coaster, exciting, exhausting, impossible to control. Where Natalie hesitated, Georgiana leapt. Where Natalie worried about consequences, Georgiana believed she could handle whatever came her way. And though Natalie adored her friend, she often felt overshadowed by her. She'd never admit it out loud, but a part of her wondered if she would ever shine in her own right, or if she would always be the quieter friend standing beside the star of every room. Still, they stayed close. They made memories. They shaped each other's lives. But as childhood turned into adulthood, and adulthood brought new responsibilities, cracks began to form. Georgiana struggled to find her direction. Career attempts came and went. An office job she quit after 2 months, a photography phase she abandoned when it got too hard, a short-lived pursuit of becoming a stylist. Nothing held her interest long enough to follow through. She was constantly chasing the next burst of excitement, the next thing she believed would finally make her feel fulfilled. Natalie watched from the sidelines, always ready to offer support but quietly wishing her friend would slow down, breathe, and choose stability over chaos. Meanwhile, Natalie's life progressed naturally. She wasn't wealthy, but she worked hard, saved carefully, and found comfort in routines. She formed meaningful relationships with coworkers, built trust with people around her, and held on to values that guided her through difficult choices. Their lives weren't drifting apart, but they were definitely moving at different speeds. Still, Natalie cherished their friendship. She believed time could fix anything. She believed loyalty could weather any storm. She believed Georgiana would always stand beside her in life, just as they had stood beside each other in childhood. Sometimes, the narrator adds gently, life doesn't signal when the winds are changing. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones whose pain grows the quietest, and sometimes we don't realize the fault lines beneath a friendship until the ground finally gives way. But there were hints, small ones, that something inside Georgiana had begun to shift. A sudden silence during conversations, a glance that lingered too long on Natalie's happiness, a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes, a distance forming that Natalie couldn't explain. One afternoon, as they sat in Natalie's kitchen drinking lemonade, Natalie noticed Georgiana staring at her in a way she couldn't understand, not with anger, not with resentment, but with something complicated, something that looked almost like fear. When Natalie asked if she was okay, Georgiana brushed it off with a laugh and said she was just tired. But the look stayed with Natalie long after she'd gone. Sometimes the heart knows when something is shifting, even if the mind tries to ignore it. And while Natalie believed her friendship with Georgiana was strong enough to survive anything, she didn't realize yet that the very foundation of their bond was already straining under unspoken weight. There are stories that break in a single moment, and there are stories that break slowly, over time, without warning. For Natalie, the cracks had already begun. She just didn't see them, not yet. The charity gala was one of Willowmere's most anticipated annual events, an evening where local organizations gathered under strings of warm lights, hoping to raise money for families in need. Natalie attended every year, never as a guest, but as a volunteer. She preferred being behind the scenes, pouring drinks, stocking tables, and coordinating silent auctions. That year, however, she was assigned to the reception table at the entrance, a spot she normally avoided because it put her in direct contact with guests. But she accepted the role without complaint. She always did what was needed. As she arranged name cards with practiced focus, she didn't notice the man approaching until he stopped directly in front of her. She looked up, and her breath caught for a moment, not from attraction, but from surprise. He didn't look like a billionaire. He didn't carry himself like one either. His name tag read, Richie Hauk, in simple handwriting. No title, no emphasis, just a name. He wore a tailored suit, yes, but he didn't wear it like armor. He stood with easy posture, his hands in his pockets, as though he were trying not to take up more space than necessary. His expression was open, calm, and attentive, nothing like the aloofness she often associated with people of his financial status. "Hi," he said with a warm smile. "I'm not sure where I'm supposed to check in." Natalie blinked, pulled herself back to the task, and pointed to the sign-in sheet. "Right here. Just print your name and initial beside it." He leaned in slightly to write, but she noticed he glanced at her more than he looked at the paper. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, more like he was genuinely curious about the person behind the table. Most wealthy donors made small talk that felt rehearsed or polite at best. Richie's voice, however, carried sincerity. "You've been helping here long?" he asked. "Since I was old enough to sign up," she replied. He chuckled softly. "You must be the most dedicated volunteer they have." It wasn't flirtation, it was a simple acknowledgement, something most people overlooked. Natalie shrugged modestly. "I just like helping." "I can tell," he said. His tone wasn't extravagant, but something in it made her pause. It was rare for someone to make her feel seen, not for what she could offer, not for what she lacked, but for who she genuinely was. As more guests arrived, she went back to work. But every so often, she caught Richie glancing her way from across the room as he mingled. He wasn't watching her in a possessive or intense way. He watched her the way someone watches a moment they don't want to forget. And when the gala program began, Richie found himself gravitating toward the volunteer area rather than the very important presentables. Natalie was organizing donations when he appeared again at her side. "You seem busy," he said. She laughed softly. "It's a big event. Do you ever get a break?" Eventually, he grinned. Well, when that moment comes, I'll save you a seat at my table. She stared at him, unsure if he was joking. Most people would have made the offer with arrogance or expectation. Richie said it as if he'd be honored if she accepted. Natalie shook her head politely. I appreciate it, but I'm working the whole night. Then maybe after the gala, he suggested. I'd like to talk to you more, if you'd be open to that. Her instinct was to shy away, to assume he was being polite, but something in his voice encouraged her to nod slightly. Maybe. Richie smiled, not triumphantly, not with ego, but with quiet gratitude. It might have ended there, but fate had a different plan. Later that evening, as Natalie took out recycling near the side exit, she found Richie standing alone outside, taking in the cool air. He turned when he heard the door open. You're still working? Just finishing, she said. You didn't have to wait. Maybe not, he replied, but I wanted to. They stood there for a moment, taking in the evening's calm. Do these events ever get easier? He asked. He tilted his head. Someone like me? A man with your influence, she said carefully. He laughed quietly. Influence. That's one way to put it. But you don't act like it, she said, almost without thinking. Richie glanced at her with curiosity. What does that mean to you? He asked gently. Natalie thought for a moment. Most people with wealth want everyone to know they have it. You don't? Richie nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. I suppose I've seen enough people use money to shape their identity. I learned a long time ago that it doesn't bring real connection or real happiness. There was no sorrow in his tone, just truth, spoken plainly. Natalie realized he wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't trying to sell an image. He was simply being himself. As they talked, their conversation flowed with ease, as if they'd known each other longer than a single evening. Richie asked about her work, her interests, her dreams, never in a prying way, but with genuine interest. She told him about growing up in Willowmere, about her love for helping others, about wanting a simple life built on honesty and warmth. Richie listened with full attention, as if every word mattered. He shared pieces of his own story, the pressure he faced from business partners who expected him to live a certain way, the loneliness he often felt despite being surrounded by people, the desire to find meaning beyond wealth. And there it was, something unspoken connecting them, something gentle, something real. The night deepened around them, and the world seemed to pause. Natalie didn't know it yet, but this quiet conversation in the cool air was the moment her future began to shift. Little did she know the depth of the connection forming between them. Little did she know how this man, so different from what she expected, would change her life in ways she could never imagine. Little did she know how their hearts would find each other in the most unexpected moments. And as Richie walked her to her car at the end of the night, neither of them said anything about the spark quietly blooming between them. They didn't need to, not yet. But Richie did say one thing before stepping back. I hope this isn't the last time we talk. Natalie's cheeks warmed, but she managed a small smile. I hope so too. They parted ways, both unaware of the journey ahead. But fate had already started writing the next chapter. In the days following the charity gala, Natalie tried to convince herself that Richie's kindness was nothing more than courtesy. She told herself he was simply being polite, generous with his attention the way he probably was with everyone. People like him, people with influence, responsibility, and constant demands, didn't usually look twice at women like her, women who lived simple lives, who valued quiet mornings and steady routines. Yet the truth lingered in her thoughts more often than she cared to admit. He had looked twice. He had sought her out. He had spoken to her as if no one else in the room mattered. A week passed, then two. Natalie assumed their conversation would remain nothing more than a pleasant memory, until the bakery door chimed one late morning. She looked up from the counter to see Richie standing there with an easy smile. Do you always work this early? He asked as he approached. Natalie blinked, caught off guard. You remembered where I said I worked? I remember everything you say, he replied gently, as though the statement were obvious. Her breath wavered just slightly. She tried to hide it. What can I get for you? What do you recommend? He asked. Something you like. Natalie pointed to a tray of still warm pastries. The cinnamon ones are fresh. They're simple but comforting. Then I'll take one, Richie said. And can I sit for a bit? She gestured toward the small seating area. He chose a corner table, not the flashiest spot, not the one that made him visible, but the one where he could speak quietly without drawing attention. For the next 30 minutes, between helping customers, she found herself drifting back to his table, each time expecting his attention to waver. It never did. He asked about her family, her childhood memories, the moments that made her who she was. Not out of curiosity alone, he genuinely wanted to understand her. And with him, Natalie found herself sharing things she normally kept tucked away, small stories she never thought anyone would want to hear. Before he left, he said, "I'd like to see you again, if you'd be comfortable with that." She hesitated only long enough to steady her breath. "I think I'd like that." Thus began something neither of them had anticipated. They started with short walks around Willomere's quiet streets. Richie never insisted on grand gestures. He never tried to impress her with extravagance. He asked if she preferred parks or bookstores, if she liked sunsets or mornings, if she enjoyed staying in or going out. Everything he asked had intention, not pressure. Some days, they met beside the small lake near town, where ducks glided across the water with gentle purpose. Other days, they sat in cozy cafes where they could talk without interruption. From the outside, nothing they did looked extraordinary. But for them, those moments carried a warmth that grew deeper with each passing day. Natalie began noticing things about Richie that weren't visible at first glance. He listened more than he spoke. He laughed softly, as if laughter was something he hadn't allowed himself often enough. He had a habit of straightening his cuffs when he felt nervous. And when he looked at her, it was with attention, a kind that made her feel chosen without ever feeling pressured. He told her about his work, but not in a way that flaunted his resources. He spoke about the responsibility it carried, the expectations placed on him, the pressure to appear flawless even when life felt overwhelming. Natalie saw the loneliness tucked between his words, the burden of being needed by many but understood by few. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't pretend to have answers. She simply listened, and her presence alone seemed to bring him comfort. Their connection didn't erupt suddenly. It grew quietly like soft light filling a room at dawn. One afternoon, as they walked along the lake, Richie paused mid-sentence. "Natalie, can I ask you something?" She turned to him, curiosity in her gentle expression. "Do you ever feel like you're living a life smaller than the one you deserve?" he said. Natalie thought carefully before answering. "I think I've built a life I'm proud of, but sometimes I wonder if I'm afraid to want more. Wanting too much feels risky." Richie nodded with understanding she didn't expect. "I've always felt like wanting less was easier, but lately," he glanced at her, his eyes softening. "Lately I've been questioning that." Their footsteps slowed. Something passed between them, something unspoken but unmistakably real. In the evenings they would talk on the phone, their conversation stretching longer each night. Natalie found herself laughing more, opening up, letting him into parts of her heart she had guarded for years. And with every call, every glance, every shared moment, her confidence began to grow. Not because Richie gave it to her, but because being with him reminded her that she had always possessed more strength than she realized. Yet while Natalie basked in this new chapter of her life, something stirred quietly in Georgiana. She watched Natalie's happiness with a mix of joy and something far more complicated. She loved her friend deeply. Of that there was no question, but she couldn't ignore the sharp ache inside her chest each time she saw Richie look at Natalie with a tenderness she'd never experienced from anyone. Georgiana had always been the bold one, the adventurous one, the one who stepped into the spotlight without hesitation. People admired her confidence, envied her fearlessness. But for the first time, she found herself standing in the shadow of someone else's joy. Natalie, the quiet one, the humble one, the dependable one. Natalie had found something lasting, something pure, something stable, and despite her best effort, Georgiana felt left behind. There were moments when she'd watch Natalie speak about Richie with a soft smile and feel a flicker of envy she despised herself for. Moments when she questioned her own worth. Moments when she wondered if she had missed her chance at something this meaningful. Still, she pushed those feelings aside. She cheered Natalie on, listened to every story, laughed at every detail. She convinced herself that her own happiness would come eventually, that she just had to wait. But sometimes a quiet seed of insecurity grows roots in places we don't notice until it's too late. One evening, as Natalie recounted a simple moment, Richie remembering her favorite candy and surprising her after work, Georgiana smiled, but the expression sat too tightly on her face. Natalie didn't notice. Her heart was too full, her mind too wrapped in the glow of someone finally treating her the way she deserved. But Richie noticed during the times the three of them crossed paths. He felt the shift in the air, the tension under Georgiana's laughter, the strain behind her compliments. He didn't understand it, though. He simply assumed life had weighed heavily on her, so he remained polite, kind, and considerate. It was not intentional encouragement. It was simply who he was, warm, courteous, steady. Yet those small moments of kindness, those glances of acknowledgement, those thoughtful words, landed differently for Georgiana. She interpreted them as something more, or rather, she needed them to mean something more. The emotional contrast between the two friends grew sharper with each passing week. Natalie was stepping into a story that felt bright and hopeful. Georgiana was drifting into a storm she didn't know how to navigate, and though neither woman understood the future yet, a quiet force was already shifting their lives in different directions, one toward love, one toward heartbreak, and neither realized just how deeply their paths were about to collide. As Natalie's relationship with Richie deepened, Georgiana's life moved in the opposite direction. Her career felt like a carousel she couldn't step off, jobs that ended before they began, opportunities that fizzled, ideas that never fully formed. She moved through each day with a little less energy, a little less confidence, and a growing fear she refused to say out loud. On the surface, she still appeared bold and spontaneous. She still told stories with flair, still acted as though she had everything under control. But beneath the surface, an unease simmered, one she didn't want anyone, especially Natalie, to notice. Natalie tried to keep their friendship balanced, even as new joy filled her life. She invited Georgiana to lunch, to movie nights, to Sunday coffee. She wanted her friend to feel included in every step of this new chapter. But no matter how much effort she put in, the distance between them grew, not out of malice, but out of unspoken pain. Sometimes, during late-night conversations, Georgiana would listen to Natalie talk about Richie's gentle gestures, his respect, his patience. She'd smile at the right moments, nod with the right timing, say all the right supportive words. But inside, something tightened. Each story reminded her of what she didn't have, and what she feared she might never have. Still, she insisted she was fine. She always insisted she was fine. When Natalie invited her to spend a weekend at Richie's lakeside house, she accepted with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course," she said, "we need a girls' weekend, and it'll be fun to see you two together." She meant it. Partly, she wanted quality time with Natalie. She wanted to feel included. She wanted to believe her life wasn't falling behind. But she also knew that being around Richie meant being around the very reminder of what she lacked: stability, affection, direction. Still, she went. The lakeside house was peaceful, surrounded by tall trees and calm water that rippled in soft waves. Natalie arrived buzzing with excitement. Richie greeted them both warmly, carrying their bags inside without a hint of arrogance. He treated Georgiana with kindness, the kind that should have felt comforting but only left her with a lingering ache. Natalie didn't notice the way Georgiana's smile cracked at the edges. She was too focused on making the weekend perfect, cooking together, playing board games, taking walks by the water. From the outside, everything looked harmonious. From the inside, tension slowly wound itself around Georgiana's chest. The first evening passed smoothly. They talked, laughed, and shared memories. But late at night, when Natalie went to bed early with a soft yawn, something shifted. Georgiana stayed behind in the living room, sipping tea and staring out at the dark water. Richie returned after finishing a phone call, and he noticed her sitting alone. "You're still up?" he asked. She nodded. "Couldn't sleep. Anything on your mind?" She hesitated. The question was harmless, but it hit a sensitive spot. She wanted to say she felt lost, that her life had no clear direction, that watching Natalie find happiness made her wonder if she would ever find her own. But she wasn't used to speaking about her vulnerabilities. Just thinking, she finally said, about life. He sat in the armchair across from her. Thinking is good. Sometimes uncomfortable, but good. She laughed softly. You make it sound wise. Not wise, Richie said. Just honest. There it was, the quiet sincerity that drew people toward him. The kind of authenticity Georgiana didn't see often. She felt suddenly exposed, as though he could see the turmoil she had buried beneath layers of charm. You and Natalie. She paused. You're really happy, aren't you? Richie's expression softened. She brings calm into my life, in a way I didn't know I needed. He gave a small smile. There's something gentle about her. Something steady. Georgiana felt her throat tighten. Not because of jealousy in the romantic sense, but because of longing. She wanted someone to speak about her that way. She wanted to be someone's calm place, someone's choice, someone's safe spot. Richie continued, unaware of the depth behind her silence. And she talks about you constantly. You mean a lot to her. Georgiana blinked quickly, holding back emotion. She means a lot to me too. But the ache inside her chest didn't fade. The conversation drifted to other topics. Work, hobbies, life goals. Richie asked questions kindly, not out of pity, but out of genuine interest. Yet each question reminded Georgiana of how uncertain her future felt. She gave answers that sounded confident, but the gaps in her life showed through. He didn't judge, he didn't pity, he simply listened. When Richie finally stood to head to bed, he offered her a friendly smile. Good night, Georgiana. I hope tomorrow is a good day for you. His kindness was gentle, but sometimes gentle things break people the most. When the room was quiet again, Georgiana leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The more she thought, the heavier she felt. She wasn't jealous of Natalie's relationship. She was jealous of not having one, of feeling stuck while others moved forward. She felt guilty for feeling that way, but the guilt didn't make the worry disappear. After that weekend, Georgiana grew more distant from Natalie, not intentionally, but emotionally. She turned down invitations, forgot to respond to messages, and avoided moments where she would feel like an outsider in Natalie's growing happiness. Natalie noticed. She always noticed. She invited Georgiana to lunch one afternoon, hoping to bridge the gap. They sat across from each other in a small cafe, the hum of chatter filling the space around them. You seem distracted lately, Natalie said gently. Georgiana forced a smile. Just life. You know how it gets. You can talk to me, Natalie offered. You always could. For a moment, Georgiana almost did. She almost confessed the insecurities eating at her. She almost told Natalie she felt lost, inadequate, scared. But vulnerability felt like a luxury she didn't know how to handle. I'm fine, she said instead, choosing the familiar shield. Natalie didn't push. She never pushed. But she left lunch with a heaviness in her heart. That night, she told Richie she felt something was off with her friend. Richie encouraged her to give Georgiana space, assuring her that friendships go through phases. Natalie wanted to believe that. She needed to believe that. She loved Georgiana. She believed their friendship could endure anything. But sometimes, distance isn't created by arguments or misunderstandings. Sometimes, it grows naturally from silent struggles. And though neither woman realized it, their friendship was entering a fragile new chapter, one that would test everything they thought they knew about: loyalty, love, and the line between helping someone and losing yourself in the process. The stage was set, the tension quietly deepening, and the next part of the story would bring a moment neither of them could ever undo. The lakeside house looked peaceful the next morning, but peace can be deceiving. Sometimes it sits quietly over a moment that's about to reshape everything beneath it. Natalie woke early, humming as she moved around the kitchen preparing breakfast. She felt hopeful about the weekend, hopeful that time together might remind Georgiana that their friendship still mattered, still had space for both of them. Richie helped her set the table on the deck outside, while Georgiana stayed upstairs longer than usual. When she finally came down, she wore a tired smile and said she hadn't slept well. Natalie worried, but tried to make the morning light and warm, filling it with small conversation and gentle laughter. They spent the afternoon exploring the lake, taking a short hike through quiet trails and returning to grill dinner as the sun began dipping behind the trees. The day went smoothly enough that Natalie felt relief settle over her. Maybe this really was what Georgiana needed, a break from everything weighing her down. They ended the evening watching a movie together, wrapped in soft blankets on the couch. but the moment felt delicate. Natalie sensed Georgiana's emotions shifting under the surface, like currents she couldn't identify or calm. By the time they turned off the lights, Natalie was exhausted. She kissed Richie goodnight, hugged Georgiana, and headed upstairs. She had no idea she was leaving behind a moment that would break open an entirely different truth. Downstairs, Richie tidied the living room, stacking coasters and straightening pillows. Georgiana lingered by the window, staring out at the night sky reflected on the lake's dark surface. He noticed her silence. Long day? She nodded. It was good, but I'm still in my head. He sat across from her, resting his forearms on his knees. You don't have to pretend around us. If something's heavy, you can say so. I know, she whispered, but sometimes it feels easier not to. Richie didn't push. He simply waited, quiet, open, patient. And that patience was its own kind of kindness, the sort Georgiana didn't know how to handle. She exhaled shakily, her eyes damp. I feel like I'm standing still while everyone else keeps moving forward, like I'm watching life happen from the outside. Richie listened, his expression soft with concern, not judgment. I'm proud of Natalie, she continued. She deserves all the good things happening to her, but when I look at her life, I can't help feeling like I failed at mine. You haven't failed, Richie said calmly. You're figuring things out. People don't move at the same pace. But what if I'm not moving at all? She whispered, her voice trembling. What if I never get there? The vulnerability in her words hit him deeply, not romantically, but with empathy. He understood what it was like to feel directionless, to wonder if life was slipping away faster than you could catch it. He'd lived through those fears himself. I don't know everything about your journey, Richie replied gently, but I know you're stronger than you think, and I know life changes quickly. What's true today won't be true forever. Something in her broke open at those words. Maybe it was the sincerity in his voice. Maybe it was hearing the kind of reassurance she hadn't felt in months. Maybe it was the way he made her feel seen without asking her to pretend. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered, wiping them away. I don't usually fall apart like this. You're allowed to, he said. Everyone has moments like this. She looked away, her breath catching. Not everyone understands. I do, he said softly. That moment, those two words, hit her harder than he realized. Because that night, Georgiana wasn't looking for romance. She wasn't looking for attention. She was looking for an anchor, something to hold on to in a life that felt like it was slipping out of her hands. And Richie's kindness felt like a hand reaching for hers. She took a shaky breath, then another. The room felt too quiet. Her heart felt too loud. She wasn't thinking clearly. She wasn't thinking at all. She stood up slowly and stepped toward him, her emotions tangled, raw and frantic. Richie, thank you for listening, for being you. He rose halfway from his seat, unsure of the shift in her tone. Georgiana, you're going to be okay. You just need time. Before he could finish, she leaned forward and kissed him. It happened fast, a surge of emotion, a broken place seeking comfort, a moment born from longing, weakness, and confusion. Richie froze in shock. It took him only a heartbeat to pull away. Wait, he said firmly, stepping back and holding up a hand. Georgiana, no, this isn't right. She stumbled backward, realizing instantly what she had done. Shame washed over her face. I'm sorry. I don't know why I... Richie shook his head gently, his voice steady but firm. Look at me. I care about you as Natalie's friend. But that's it. I'm with her. My heart is hers. Georgiana's breathing hitched. I know. I do. Her voice cracked. I feel so lost. I wasn't thinking. I believe you, Richie said sincerely. But this can't happen again. She nodded rapidly, tears filling her eyes. It won't. I promise. Please don't tell her. Please. I messed up. I messed up so badly. Richie exhaled deeply. Tonight never should have happened, but I don't want to hurt her with something that meant nothing. We'll move past it. Her shoulders collapsed with relief and humiliation. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Richie hesitated for a moment, torn between wanting to comfort her and knowing he needed to keep distance. Try to get some rest, he said softly before heading to the stairs. He paused halfway up, glancing back. Georgiana sat trembling, broken by her own mistake. He didn't know whether keeping silent was the right decision. He only knew that revealing the moment would shatter Natalie, and he couldn't bear the thought of hurting her. So he chose silence, and silence has consequences. The house fell quiet again. Natalie slept upstairs, unaware that a single moment downstairs had just rewritten the future she dreamed of. Richie lay awake for hours, the guilt sitting heavy on his chest. Georgiana cried herself to sleep, choking on regret she couldn't undo. Neither of them meant for the moment to happen. Neither wanted it. Neither knew how deeply it would carve into all their lives. But life doesn't pause to let people undo their worst mistakes. It simply waits for the moment when those mistakes come to light. And that moment was coming, faster than any of them realized. The morning after the kiss, Georgiana left the lakeside house earlier than planned. She told Natalie she needed to get back for a work thing, though everyone silently knew work wasn't the reason. Natalie hugged her goodbye, unaware of the turmoil twisting inside her friend. Georgiana drove in silence for hours, replaying the moment again and again. The weakness, the confusion, the way Richie had pulled back immediately. Every detail tormented her. She kept muttering to herself, "Why did I do that? What is wrong with me?" By the time she reached home, she felt hollow. The shame didn't dissipate, it grew. She tried to distract herself, binge-watching shows, reorganizing her closet, scrolling endlessly on her phone, but none of it worked. Every quiet moment brought the memory crashing back. She hated what she'd done. She hated how lost she felt. She hated the person she feared she was becoming. Days passed, weeks even. The distance between her and Natalie widened, not because Natalie pushed her away, but because Georgiana didn't know how to face her without seeing her mistake reflected in every smile. Then one evening she got a message from someone she hadn't spoken to in months. Jason Miller. "Hey, I heard you were back in town. Want to grab a drink?" Jason wasn't a stranger. He'd been a co-worker from her last steady job, the one she quit impulsively when things got overwhelming. He had been friendly back then, warm in the way familiar faces are. They weren't close, but they had shared jokes, lunches, and the occasional conversation that felt more personal than it should have. She stared at the message for a long time before finally replying, "Sure." Maybe she said yes because she needed conversation. Maybe she said yes because she was tired of holding everything inside. Whatever the reason, she met him at a quiet lounge later that week. Jason greeted her with an easy smile, the kind that didn't demand anything from her. "You look tired," he said, not unkindly. "I feel tired," she admitted. They sat in a booth beneath soft lighting, and as the night went on, Georgiana found herself talking more than she intended. Not about the kiss, she would never betray Natalie that way, but about her job struggles, her tangled emotions, her fear of not being enough. Jason listened, really listened, and though he didn't have answers, his presence made her feel less invisible. He told her he'd been struggling too. Financial trouble, family tensions, lost motivation. It was one of the first conversations in months where Georgiana didn't feel like she had to pretend she was fine. The conversation wasn't romantic. It wasn't flirtatious. It was two people sitting with their separate wounds, finding temporary quiet together. When they left, Jason walked her to her car. "If you ever need someone to talk to," he said, "I'm around. No pressure." "Thank you," she replied softly. For the first time in weeks, she felt something like relief. Their communication didn't end there. Over the next few days they exchanged messages, small things at first. "How's your day? Rough morning. You'll get through it." "Thanks." It was harmless, supportive, safe. And on one particularly difficult evening when her anxiety felt unbearable, she accepted Jason's invitation to take a drive through the outskirts of town. They talked, laughed a little, admitted fears they hadn't whispered to anyone else. The night grew colder, the air quiet. They parked beneath a cluster of dim street lamps, sharing stories about the moments in life that had shaken them the most. Georgiana felt vulnerable, exposed in a way that was dangerous for someone already drowning in emotion. She wasn't thinking logically. She wasn't thinking clearly at all. She was simply grasping for something, anything, that made her feel less like she was disappearing. And Jason, equally fragile, reached for her in return. There was no romance in it, no intention, no plan, just two people leaning on each other in a moment of emotional exhaustion. After that night, they drifted apart again. No relationship formed, no closeness lingered. It was just one night, an impulsive attempt to escape their own minds for a few hours. Days later, Georgiana tried to go back to normal. She tried to push forward, tried to be the friend Natalie deserved, tried to pretend everything was fine. But the guilt she carried from the lakeside house, combined with the vulnerability she'd shared with Jason, made her feel like she was walking on glass. Then one morning, she sat on the edge of her bathtub staring at a pregnancy test in her trembling hands. The lines were clear, undeniable, immediate. Her stomach dropped. The room tilted. She felt cold wash over her skin. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She took a second test, then a third. All the same. Her eyes blurred with panic. Her breath came in shallow, rapid bursts. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, shaking so hard she could barely stay upright. This wasn't a mistake she could hide. This wasn't a feeling she could swallow. This wasn't a burden she knew how to carry. Fear clawed through her, not because of the pregnancy alone, but because she didn't know who the father was. She remembered the night with Jason, brief, fragile, desperate. She remembered the moment at the lakeside house, her kiss with Richie, rejected instantly but now tangled in her guilt-ridden mind. Logic told her Richie couldn't be the father, but fear doesn't follow logic. Fear feeds on shame, on uncertainty, on the what-ifs that grow louder in the dark. Her world felt like it was collapsing under its own weight. She spent days avoiding Natalie's calls, avoiding messages, avoiding everything that reminded her of the life she had already damaged. She contemplated telling Jason, then decided she couldn't face the conversation. She contemplated confessing everything to Natalie, then felt her stomach twist at the thought of destroying the one person who loved her most. Guilt suffocated her. Fear consumed her. Silence trapped her. As the wedding day approached, the pressure mounted until it felt like a vice around her lungs. She should have told someone earlier. She should have asked for help. She should have done anything other than carry it alone. But lonely decisions are made in lonely minds. And by the time she stepped into that bridesmaid dress, her secrets had grown too loud to ignore. She was drowning under her own fear, and she mistook confession for escape. Walking into that reception hall, with Natalie glowing and Richie calm beside her, Georgiana felt her breath falter. Her pulse hammered. Her hands trembled. The truth, or her version of it, sat on her tongue like a weight she could no longer bear. She didn't stand up to ruin the wedding. She stood up because she believed she was already ruined. She stood up because the fear inside her had reached its breaking point. She stood up because she didn't know any other way out. The wedding was about to become the stage for a confession she wished she had never reached for, and the chaos that followed would change every life in the room. The proposal was something Richie planned with quiet intention, the way he approached everything meaningful. He didn't hire a crew, didn't book an extravagant venue, didn't turn it into a spectacle. He chose something that felt personal, something that reflected the way their love had grown. One evening, he drove Natalie to the same lakeside house where they'd spent many peaceful weekends. She thought it was just another getaway, another chance to relax and enjoy the calming view of the water. She'd packed simple clothes and a book, imagining long hours curled up on the deck with Richie beside her. When they arrived, the sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky with warm streaks of gold. Natalie stepped out of the car and immediately noticed lanterns hanging from the trees, hundreds of them, each glowing softly, swaying in the gentle breeze. She gasped. "Richie, what is all this?" He smiled in that quiet way of his. "Come with me." He led her down the wooden path toward the lake, the lanterns lighting their way like floating stars. At the end of the path, a small table sat with 2 glasses and a single bouquet of sunflowers, the kind Natalie grew outside her childhood home. Her heart beat faster, her breath catching as realization crept in. Richie didn't rush. He wanted her to feel every second. He took her hands, his expression steady and full of warmth. "Natalie," he said softly, "you've brought more peace into my life than I ever thought I deserved. You listen, you care. You see the person behind everything the world expects of me." Her eyes shimmered. "I don't want a life built on status or appearances," he continued. "I want a life built with you, steady, honest, and full of moments just like this." He reached into his pocket, dropped to one knee, and opened a small velvet box. "Natalie, will you marry me?" Her breath broke into a quiet sob. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes, of course I will." Richie stood, wrapping his arms around her as she clung to him. The lanterns flickered gently around them, as if the world itself had paused to honor the moment. They held each other for a long time, both overwhelmed with joy. But joy wasn't the only emotion in that moment. Behind a window of the house, unseen by the couple, Georgiana stared out with trembling hands pressed against the glass. She had arrived early, at Richie's request, to help set up the lanterns. She hadn't expected the proposal to unfold before her eyes, and she certainly hadn't expected it to hit her the way it did. Natalie had told her earlier that week that Richie was planning something special, but Georgiana assumed it was a small date night. She thought she'd have time to prepare herself emotionally. She didn't. The proposal unfolded like a scene she wasn't meant to watch, beautiful, tender, undeniably right, and yet watching it made her chest ache in ways she couldn't explain. Natalie texted her moments later. "He proposed. I said yes. Where are you? Come down." Georgiana swiped away quickly, wiping her face before forcing a smile she didn't feel. When she stepped outside, Natalie ran toward her, holding out her hand to show the ring. "Can you believe it?" "It's beautiful," Georgiana whispered, hugging her tightly. Too tightly. Natalie didn't notice. Richie chimed in with a warm smile. "Thank you for helping earlier. It meant a lot." Georgiana nodded quickly, unable to speak for fear her voice would crack. Natalie was too busy floating on happiness to sense the storm inside her friend. She talked about dates, possible venues, dresses, colors, every detail she had dreamed about since she was a little girl. Georgiana listened. She smiled. She agreed. She supported. But inside, her emotions twisted with guilt, fear, and something she hated herself for feeling. She wasn't jealous of Richie. She wasn't jealous of Natalie's love. She was terrified of the secret she carried, the one she had no idea how to reveal without destroying, the woman who trusted her most. When Natalie asked her to be the maid of honor, the request landed like a weight she wasn't ready to carry. Georgiana paused only a fraction of a second, but even that tiny hesitation felt like a crack in her world. "Of course I will," she said, forcing her voice steady. "I'd be honored." The three of them stood together, Natalie glowing with joy, Richie proud and content, Georgiana trying not to collapse beneath the pressure. As the evening went on, the contrast grew sharper. Richie and Natalie laughed easily, feeding each other bites of cake, talking about plans for the future. They looked like two people who belonged together in every way. Georgiana sat quietly at the edge of the deck, watching them with a hollow feeling she couldn't shake. Every smile she offered was an effort. Every breath felt tight. Her heart pounded with the terrifying knowledge of what she was hiding. Natalie noticed her silence eventually. "Gee, are you okay?" she asked softly. Georgiana nodded quickly. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Natalie accepted the answer without question, too wrapped in the glow of the moment to sense anything deeper. When the night ended and the couple disappeared inside, Georgiana stayed on the deck alone. The lanterns flickered above her, casting unsteady light across the water. She placed a hand on her stomach, a gesture she didn't even realize she was making. "How am I supposed to tell you?" she whispered into the darkness. She wasn't ready. She couldn't imagine the pain it would cause. She couldn't imagine the look on Natalie's face. And the longer she waited, the harder the truth became to face. The engagement that meant everything to Natalie became a countdown for Georgiana, each passing day tightening the pressure around her chest. Natalie dreamed of walking down the aisle with her best friend by her side. Georgiana dreamed of finding any way to escape the consequences she feared. Two women, bound by love and history, heading toward the same day for entirely different reasons. And soon their paths would collide with a force none of them were prepared to face. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear skies, soft sunlight, and a gentle breeze moving through the trees like nature itself wanted to bless the moment. Guests began to gather early, filling the outdoor venue with quiet admiration. White chairs lined the aisle, petals scattered across the walkway, and a delicate arch of fresh flowers stood proudly at the front. Natalie's breath caught when she stepped into her bridal suite. The room was filled with bouquets, glowing light, and a long mirror that reflected a version of herself she scarcely recognized. Her dress, a lace gown she'd tried on with trembling hands weeks before, fit her perfectly, the soft fabric cascading in gentle layers. She touched the ring Richie had given her, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Today was the day she had imagined since childhood, but never truly believed she'd live. She was nervous, yes, but it was the sweet kind of nerves, the kind fueled by anticipation, love, and hope. Her mother fussed over her hair. Her aunts cried every time they looked at her. Bridesmaids whispered excitedly around her. There were moments when the noise faded, and she found herself standing still, taking everything in as though she were watching a dream unfold around her. But one person hovered at the edges of the room with a stiffness that didn't belong: Georgiana. Dressed in a soft blush gown, hair pinned back neatly, she looked the part of maid of honor. But her hands kept trembling. Her gaze drifted away whenever Natalie caught her eye. She forced smiles that dissolved the moment she turned her head. Natalie noticed the tension, the unease, but she dismissed it as nerves. "You okay?" she asked softly as she adjusted her veil. Georgiana nodded too quickly, just overwhelmed. "Big day, you know." Natalie placed a gentle hand on her friend's arm. "I'm glad you're here with me." Those words cut deeper than Georgiana expected. Her eyes glistened before she blinked the feeling away. "Always," she whispered, though part of her knew the lie hidden beneath the promise. Downstairs, Richie paced quietly as his best man tried to distract him with jokes and chatter. But Richie's thoughts kept drifting to Natalie. Every few minutes he asked the same question: "Is she okay? Are they finished getting ready?" And every time he was told the same answer: "Yes, she's fine. Stop worrying." He wasn't worried. He was simply eager, the type of eagerness that came with loving someone so deeply you counted the minutes until you saw them again. Richie tugged at his cuffs, straightened his tie, checked the time, then repeated the entire pattern. Inside the bridal suite, guests were being seated. Music drifted in from outside. Natalie's heart raced. A knock on the door signaled it was time. Her father entered, eyes shining with pride. "Ready?" She nodded, taking his arm. "Ready." They walked toward the ceremony area as bridesmaids lined up in pairs. Georgiana stood at the front of the line, bouquet clutched tightly in her hands. The music began, a soft melody that flowed through the trees. Guests turned, smiling as the wedding party made their way down the aisle. Richie stood at the front, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the spot where Natalie would appear. He looked nervous, hopeful, overwhelmed. His breath hitched when he finally saw her, glowing, radiant, every step she took leading her closer to him. Natalie's smile softened the moment their eyes met. Richie's expression shifted into something tender, full of promise. But at the edge of the aisle, Georgiana's world spun. She had told herself all morning she could do this. She had rehearsed her breathing, rehearsed the smile she'd wear, rehearsed the speech she would give at the reception. But as she watched the ceremony unfold, watched Richie gaze at Natalie with unwavering devotion, watched the joy ripple through every guest, her secret twisted painfully inside her. Her pulse pounded, her breath shortened, her chest tightened until she felt she couldn't breathe. Every step Natalie took toward Richie only intensified the panic rising within her. She looked at them, happy, certain, steady, and her mind crashed beneath the pressure of everything she'd been hiding. She didn't just fear the truth, she feared what the truth would destroy. The ceremony unfolded beautifully. Their vows were heartfelt, their voices steady despite emotion. Guests sniffled and dabbed at their eyes. Even Georgiana forced herself to clap, forced a smile for photos, forced her body to stay upright despite shaking. But inside her, something had cracked beyond repair. When they reached the reception, the atmosphere was bright and joyful. Tables shimmered with candles and golden accents. Plates clattered softly as meals were served. Guests laughed, took pictures, congratulated the couple. Richie couldn't take his eyes off Natalie. Natalie couldn't stop smiling. Everything felt exactly as it should be. Except for Georgiana. She lingered at the edge of the room, fingers gripping her glass, her breath unsteady. She could barely hear the conversations around her. Her thoughts pulsed in frantic loops. "You have to tell them. You should have told her sooner. You can't keep hiding this. You'll tear everything apart. You already have." Her fear didn't whisper anymore. It roared. She glanced toward Natalie and Richie, watching them dance as if the world belonged only to them. They looked perfect, untouchable, whole. Her eyes burned. Then the DJ announced it was time for speeches. The maid of honor would speak first. Natalie beamed at her friend, expecting a warm story, a heartfelt message, a celebration of their bond. Georgiana stood slowly, her legs trembling under her weight. Her bouquet shook in her hands. She tried to swallow, but her throat felt too tight. The room quieted. All eyes turned to her. She felt the pressure of their attention like heat. Natalie watched her with trust shining in her eyes. Richie watched her with polite expectation. And Georgiana felt the weight of her decision crush what little stability she had left. She took one step forward, then another. Her breath hitched. Her nerves collapsed. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was reacting. Her voice came out thin at first, then louder. "I need to say something." Whispers scattered through the room. People leaned closer. Natalie gave her an encouraging smile. That smile undid her completely. Her words spilled out before she could stop them. A collective gasp spread through the reception. Chairs creaked. Glasses froze mid-air. Natalie blinked rapidly, unable to process the sentence she'd just heard. Georgiana swallowed hard, tears sliding down her cheeks. And it might be Richie's child. Natalie dropped her bouquet. Richie's heart stopped. Guests covered their mouths. The air shattered. Natalie's face drained of color so quickly it frightened those nearest her. She looked from Georgiana to Richie, to Georgiana again. Her eyes widened with shock, with hurt, with disbelief that sliced through her chest like glass. Richie took a step forward, shaking his head violently. "No, Natalie, wait. This isn't true." Georgiana sobbed, covering her mouth, realizing too late what she had done. Whispers exploded through the room, some horrified, some confused, some already drawing conclusions. Natalie stumbled back as if struck. The man she loved, the friend she trusted, both standing before her, one stunned, one breaking down. She no longer knew who to look at, who to believe, who to breathe near. The wedding, the celebration she dreamed of, fell apart before her eyes, and the chaos was only beginning. Chaos erupted the instant Georgiana's words hit the air. Guests whispered frantically, some rising from their seats, others gripping the edges of their tables as if needing something solid to hold on to. The DJ cut the music mid-song. Servers froze in place. The entire room became a storm of shock. Natalie felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Someone reached for her arm, but she pulled away before she even realized who it was. She could barely hear anything. Only the rush of her heartbeat thundering in her ears, drowning out every voice, every gasp, every explanation. Richie stepped forward, his face drained of color. "Natalie, listen to me, please. This isn't what it sounds like." His voice shook, not with guilt, but with desperation. Natalie stared at him with disbelief that cut deeper than any blade. "How can you say that?" Her voice trembled. "Why does she believe it could be yours?" Before Richie could answer, Georgiana cried out, collapsing into a chair, hands shaking violently. I didn't mean to say it like that. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her trembling only made things worse. Guests watched as though witnessing a tragedy unfold in real time. Richie turned toward her, his voice tight. "Why would you say that? You know it isn't true. You know what actually happened." Natalie's head snapped toward Richie. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice a mix of fear and fury. She hadn't expected an easy answer, but she hadn't been prepared for this. Richie exhaled shakily. "We need to talk privately, not here." Nothing could have sounded more suspicious. Natalie backed away. "No. If something happened between you two, I deserve to know now." "Natalie," Georgiana sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." Richie clenched his jaw. "Not like that. It wasn't. Natalie, please." The room filled with hushed voices. Everyone watched them, every movement, every breath, waiting for the next blow. Natalie's father finally stepped in, firmly placing a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go somewhere quiet." Richie tried to follow, but a groomsman stopped him. "She needs a minute," he murmured. Richie swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly. Natalie was led to a small room at the back of the venue, her steps unsteady. Her mother hovered close, wanting to comfort her daughter but unsure where to begin. When Richie finally entered, He closed the door behind him, leaving the noise outside. Natalie stood stiffly, arms wrapped around herself. "Tell me," she whispered. "All of it." Richie looked at her with a pain that mirrored her own. "What she said isn't true. The baby isn't mine." Natalie looked away, fighting tears. Why would she believe it might be? Richie hesitated, and that single hesitation sliced through her. "Because something happened," he admitted quietly. "Something I should have told you." Natalie's breath caught. "Something happened?" Richie nodded, voice cracking. "She kissed me." Her heart dropped. "When?" she whispered. "The night at the lakeside house," he said. "You went to bed early." She was upset, overwhelmed. She misinterpreted my kindness. She came close and kissed me. I pulled away immediately. I told her no. I told her I loved you. Natalie stared at him, her expression unreadable. "And you didn't tell me," she said softly. Richie ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to hurt you with something that was a misunderstanding, something she regretted instantly. It meant nothing." "But your silence meant something," Natalie said, her voice trembling. "It meant you chose for me what truth I could handle." Richie stepped forward, but she flinched back. He froze. "Natalie," he whispered, "I swear to you, I've never touched her beyond that moment. I've never betrayed you." Natalie's tears finally fell. "I believe you didn't want it, but it still happened, and you hid it from me." Richie's chest tightened. "Yes, I did, and I was wrong." Before Natalie could respond, a knock echoed from the door. It was Georgiana. She stood there pale, shaking, her makeup streaked with tears. "Natalie, I need to talk to you." Natalie wiped her cheeks, steadying herself. "Come in." Georgiana entered slowly, unable to lift her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know that isn't enough. I know I ruined everything." "Why did you say it like that?" Natalie asked, not angry, just broken. "Why would you say the baby might be his?" Georgiana's shoulders collapsed. "Because I don't know who the father is." Natalie's eyes widened in shock. Richie looked pained for her. Georgiana continued, voice trembling. "There was someone else, someone I was seeing privately. It wasn't a relationship. It wasn't stable. It was just a moment when I felt alone. And then everything spiraled out of control. The kiss with Richie wasn't tied to it. But when I found out I was pregnant," she choked on her words. "I panicked. I didn't think straight. And today, it felt like the truth was clawing out of me." Natalie shook her head slowly. "So, you said it at my wedding." "I didn't want to," Georgiana cried. "I didn't mean to. I was scared. I thought if I didn't say something, I would suffocate. And when I looked at you, I couldn't keep it in." Richie closed his eyes, overwhelmed. Natalie stared at her former best friend, a hollow ache filling her chest. "Do you even understand what you've done?" "I do now," Georgiana whispered. "But too late. Why didn't you come to me before today?" Natalie asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth privately?" Georgiana collapsed into a chair. "Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't want you to see what a mess I was. And because I was terrified. You'd hate me." Natalie swallowed. "You should have trusted me more than that," Georgiana sobbed. "I should have." Silence settled over them, heavy but full of everything that needed to be said. Natalie turned to Richie. "I need space." He nodded slowly, pain etched across his face. "I'll give you anything you need. I need both of you to leave," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please." Richie hesitated, wanting to hold her, but he respected her request. He walked out quietly, closing the door behind him. Georgiana stood, tears streaming. "Natalie, I never wanted to hurt you." Natalie stared at her with a grief deeper than anger. "But you did." And with that, Georgiana left too, the weight of her choices crushing her. Alone in the quiet room, Natalie sank to the floor, her wedding dress pooling around her like fallen hope. The guests outside whispered about what had happened. Her parents waited anxiously. Richie stood outside the door, leaning against the wall with his head in his hands. Georgiana sat in her car, shaking, unable to drive away. Everything had shattered. Everything had changed in a matter of minutes, and there was no easy path forward, not for any of them. The days following the ruined wedding felt heavy, slow, and disorienting. Willowmere buzzed with whispers, people trying to piece together rumors they barely understood. But for Natalie, the outside world didn't exist. She stayed with her parents, barely speaking, barely eating, barely sleeping. Her mind replayed every moment of the wedding like a loop she couldn't escape. Richie reached out gently, never pushing, giving her space just as she'd asked. He sent texts that simply read, "I'm here. I'm not giving up. Take all the time you need." He didn't beg, didn't pressure, didn't justify. He just waited, hoping she'd one day be ready. Georgiana, meanwhile, disappeared almost entirely. She stayed in her apartment with curtains closed, phone on silent, mind spiraling in guilt she didn't know how to navigate. She told no one what she was going through. Not her family, not any friends. She was terrified of the world, terrified of judgment, terrified of the results she knew she had to face. It took 3 days before she finally worked up the courage to call Richie. He answered on the first ring. "Georgiana, are you okay?" "No," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "I'm not okay, but we need to settle this. I can't let this ruin Natalie's life any more than it already has." Richie exhaled. "I agree." They arranged to meet at a small clinic in the neighboring town, somewhere quiet, far from their community's watchful eyes. The test would answer the question once and for all, whether either of them was ready for the outcome or not. On the day of the appointment, they sat in the waiting room, both tense, both exhausted, both silently praying for different reasons. Georgiana wrung her hands. "I know you're not the father, I know that, but I can't live with the doubt." Richie nodded calmly. "Whatever the result is, we'll face it, but I believe you're right." The nurse called her name. Georgiana disappeared into the back rooms while Richie sat alone, hands clasped tightly, thinking about Natalie. Her expression in the small room, the heartbreak behind her eyes. He would relive that moment for the rest of his life. For Georgiana, the test felt like walking through a tunnel with no light on either end. She hated the sterile walls, the paperwork, the questions. She hated the silence more, the way every heartbeat felt like it echoed too loudly in her own ears. When it was done, the nurse told them results would be ready soon. Soon felt like forever. They waited in near silence, broken only by Georgiana's soft, anxious breaths. Finally, the nurse returned with an envelope. Georgiana stared at it, frozen. Richie reached out. "Do you want me to read it?" She shook her head. "No, I have to do it." Her fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. She read silently at first, then again. Then again. Tears gathered in her eyes, tears of relief, pain, confirmation. Richie waited, barely breathing. Finally, Georgiana looked up. "It's not you," she whispered. "You're not the father." Richie closed his eyes, letting out a breath he had been holding since the moment she made her confession at the wedding. But relief wasn't the only thing in his expression. There was sorrow, too. Sorrow for Natalie, sorrow for Georgiana. Sorrow for everything that had been broken along the way. Georgiana covered her face with both hands. "I'm so sorry," she cried, shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry for ruining everything. I'm sorry for hurting her. I'm sorry for hurting you. I'm sorry for being so afraid that I made the worst decision I've ever made in my life." Richie placed a hand on the arm of her chair, not in comfort but in acknowledgement. "You need to tell her," he said quietly. "She deserves the truth." Georgiana nodded, tears still falling. "I will. I'm scared." "I know," Richie said. "But this is the only way forward." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Richie, I never wanted your life tied to mine like this. I never wanted Natalie to look at you and wonder." Richie swallowed hard. "I know you didn't, but it happened. And now we fix it." As they walked out of the clinic, the evening air felt heavier somehow. Not because of uncertainty anymore, but because the truth meant facing consequences fully, without excuses or shadows to hide in. Meanwhile, Natalie sat on her childhood porch, staring at nothing. Her mother brought her tea she barely touched. Her father sat nearby, pretending to read a newspaper while watching her with quiet worry. When her phone buzzed on the porch table, Natalie didn't reach for it at first. She'd ignored dozens of messages in the last few days. Apologies, condolences, unwanted curiosity. But the screen kept lighting up. Buzz, buzz, buzz. This wasn't a quick text. It was a call. From Richie. Her hand trembled as she answered. Silence filled the line for a moment. "Natalie," Richie said softly, "we have the results." Her throat tightened, and There was no dramatic pause. He didn't make her wait. "It's not mine." Natalie closed her eyes, exhaling a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief flooded her, but it didn't erase the pain. It didn't erase the betrayal of the moment, the public humiliation, the trust that had fractured. She whispered, "Thank you for telling me. I want to explain everything," Richie said. "Whenever you're ready." Natalie hesitated. She wasn't ready for everything. Not the whole conversation, not the emotional weight. But she needed one thing. "Is Georgiana okay?" she asked softly. Richie paused. "She's struggling, badly." Natalie nodded, tears building. She loved Richie, yes, but she also loved Georgiana, even if that love was wounded. After a moment of silence, Richie said, "She wants to talk to you. I told her she needed to." "I'll wait," Richie said gently. Natalie hung up, staring at the sky as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She wasn't sure how she felt. Relieved, angry, heartbroken, hopeful. The emotions tangled in ways she couldn't name, but she did know one thing. The truth didn't erase the damage. It simply revealed the path ahead, and choosing that path would be one of the hardest decisions of her life. If this story pulled at your heart, don't forget to like the video, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more emotional storytelling, share this story with someone who might need its message. Your support helps this channel grow and reach more people with powerful life lessons.